Hello. Hello. Welcome to the Museum of the City of New York. My name is Lily Tuttle, and I am the curator of the museum's exhibition, Art in the Open, 50 Years of Public Art in New York. This evening, we are thrilled to present Love It or Hate It, Public Art and Controversy, the opening event in our series of programs presented in conjunction with the exhibition. Art in the Open marks the 40th anniversary of the Public Art Fund, highlighting works that have transformed the public spaces of the city, as well as public expectation of the role and potential for art that exists outside of the traditional confines of museums and galleries. In the years since the Public Art Fund's creation, hundreds of innovative artworks, both permanent and temporary, have been installed in the public spaces of New York, making this the most robust and vibrant environment for public art in the world. Tonight's event takes a look at one aspect of public art in New York, the controversy that surrounds works installed in public spaces and how their location drives intense scrutiny that can lead to larger social debates. We are honored to have a wide range of distinguished speakers here to consider this topic tonight. Audrey Flack, who is a painter and sculptor, Kendal Henry, who is the current director of the Percent for Art program, Ohad Meromi, an Israeli-born sculptor who lives and works in New York, and Harriet Senie, the director of the Art Museum Studies at City College of New York. Our moderator for this evening is Michele Bogart, professor of art history at Stony Brook University. Professor Bogart's areas of expertise are urban design and commercial culture, and she has authored several books, including the prize-winning The Politics of Urban Beauty, New York and its Art Commission. Her forthcoming book is called Sculpture and Gotham, Art and Urban Renewal in New York. It comes out this April, but is available for pre-order now. Following the program, we invite everyone to head upstairs to the museum's rotunda for a light reception. Art in the Open will be open for viewing on the museum's second floor. I hear it's pretty good. I would like to thank the promotional partners of this event, which you can find listed in your program. We truly appreciate their support. And please join us in the new year for the next event in this series, Underground Art, a tour of the 2nd Avenue subway. On Sunday, January 28th at 1 p.m., Sandra Bloodworth and Lester Berg of the MTA Arts and Design program will lead a tour of the extraordinary art installations in the 4 new 2nd Avenue subway stations. Limited spots are available and tickets are selling fast. You can purchase a ticket at the museum shop this evening or online at www.mcny.org/public art. Tonight, join the museum as a member, and we will gift you 3 months of membership for free. That is 15 months of membership for the price of 12. You can find out more about membership or sign up at the shop upstairs immediately after the program. And at this time, I would like to ask you to silence anything that buzzes or beeps, but feel free to tweet using the hashtag MCNYLive. And now I would like to welcome our speakers to the stage.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Michele Bogart, and I'm moderating tonight. And we're here tonight with a very distinguished group comprised of artists, an art historian, and a leading art administrator to examine the matter of controversial contemporary public art. As many of you probably know, there's a lot of attention being given to older monuments right now. Some, deemed symbols of hate, have become, significant flashpoints for debate, including one just across the street from here on Fifth Avenue, the monument to the mid-19th century obstetric surgeon J. Marion Sims. Tonight's panel is not about these monuments, but a word of historical reflection is in order. Most people have the sense that the older monuments were uncontroversial in their own time. My research, my work actually shows that this wasn't so, that controversy has surrounded public art since the turn of the 20th century and was invariably bound up with politics. The difference was, however, that publics mattered less. We didn't hear a range of public voices. They were hard to find in the historical record, and believe me, I've looked. That situation changed in 1922, with the gargantuan Civic Virtue, a progressive era allegorical sculpture statue of a male virtue standing astride two feminized sea creatures symbolizing vice. That monument, which stood in front of City Hall until 1938, that monument elicited broad public outcry, manipulated to some extent then, as these cases often are now, by political officials. The precedent of civic virtue raised consciousness. It emboldened New Yorkers to start voicing opinions in the last third of the 20th century, when artistic styles had begun shifting from the figurative to minimalist abstraction for the most part, and when, as this marvelous exhibit upstairs shows, government and private organizations started to invest in public art to enrich the city. The focus of this panel begins at that contentious moment in New York City's public art history, the early 1980s, and extends to the present. Starting with art historian Harriet Senie, each of our panelists is going to reflect upon a work with which she or he has been involved as a historian, artist, or art administrator, and hopefully together offer a bit of compare and contrast. The majority of works seen in the exhibition above are projects that, in the end, went relatively smoothly. They went up, or as smoothly as public art, which is a uniquely collaborative enterprise, can go. Our panel puts perspectives on current debates by looking at the controversial ones. What caused these circumstances? Was the problem inherent in the works themselves, to the particular people that responded or orchestrated the reactions? To what extent do circumstances reflect the broader history of New York City at the time? Each speaker will offer a case study, in effect, of specific artist projects, but also together a snapshot of New York City art, landscape, and politics over the course of 3 decades. And they show the evolution of public art organization and citywide and neighborhood politics. They may also reveal how notions of community were constituted and the extent to which the meaning of public art is as a process as much as it is an object. That said, each case highlights the importance of place, site, and materiality, such that conflicts resulting in removal altered or destroyed the works entirely, entirely. So the panel will proceed as follows. I'm going to introduce our speakers all at once first, and then ask each of them to speak briefly about the work that proved to be the most engaging or challenging, whatever it is. I'll ask them a few follow-up questions for them to go back and forth with until about 7:25, and then we'll have time for questions from you. So let me start things off by introducing our speakers. Our first speaker, Harriet Senie, is director of the Master's Program in Art History and Art Museum Studies at City College of New York. Her 2001 book, called The Tilted Art Controversy, Dangerous Precedent, has been a touchstone for debates over the role of public art. Our second speaker, Audrey Flack, is a pioneer of photorealism and a nationally recognized painter and sculptor. For the past 25 years, she has been creating monumental statues of female deities. Her work is in major collections, including the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Museum of Modern Art, and the Solomon R. Guggenheim Museum. Our third speaker, Ohad Meromi, is from Kibbutz Misra, Israel, and he lives and works here in New York. He has exhibited in venues including the Israel Museum, the Sculpture Center, and MoMA PS1. His iconic bright pink sculpture, Sunbather, currently installed on a traffic median at the intersection of 43rd Avenue in Queens, elicited some debate in Long Island City in 2015. Our final speaker will be Kendal Henry, and he is the director of the Percent for Art program, managed by New York City's Department of Cultural Affairs. Managed by Cultural Affairs. Percent for Art commissions a diverse mix of artists to create hundreds of multimedia site-specific works throughout the city. He is also an artist and a curator. So with that, we're going to ask Professor Senie to speak a little about
Tilted Art.
Tilted Art.
Can we have the image up here? Is it up? Okay, great, thank you. Just to put this particularly in place, Tilted Art was commissioned in 1981, installed the year Reagan was inaugurated as president, and removed in 1989, the year the Berlin Wall fell. It was a commission of the General Services Administration, and it was a Percent for Art commission. The building and plaza had been there for quite some time. I think it's hard today to reconstruct how pervasive this controversy and its reportage were. How many of you remember it? Okay, good. The last time I asked that question, one of my students said I was 3. Never mind. Even my dentist wanted to talk about it. I wrote this book because I couldn't understand what all the fuss was about. And here's what I learned. He who frames the controversy usually wins. And this one was framed as a stay or go issue. And I wrote this book because I wanted to try to change the conversation, and I have to say here, I don't think I was successful, but I'm gonna try again tonight. What happens when you change the frame? That's what I thought was missing. So I thought, okay, what if we think about this in an art frame? Well, it's interesting because public art is not usually discussed as art, and Sarah's art in particular is very hard to classify. Okay, but what about public art? Art and public art are not the same thing. Public art operates outside of a museum and gallery system, and so typically there are no ads and certainly no reviews. But Tilted Art was not typical of other public art, and there are many different kinds of public art, as I'm sure you all know, and the single object sculpture type that he represented was already being questioned. Public space in certain ways was the most interesting frame to me. Tilted Art was blamed both for not improving Federal Plaza and for ruining it. It didn't block anyone's path. You can probably see that here. You could walk just the way you had before. But the problem was that people couldn't see over it, and in New York, that's a dangerous feeling. Public policy. Arts funding was challenged from the beginning of the decade, and by the end of the decade, the very future of the National Endowment for the Arts was in question. There was no policy for de-accessioning public art, and there still isn't, and most public art programs don't have one. In 1985, there was a public hearing. Probably most of you saw that in the press. I was there, so I had a sense of what was going on. People were asked to vote for or against removal. 122 people spoke for keeping it. 58 people spoke for removing it. This is what they complained about. These were the chief complaints. It is an art. It reminds me of the Berlin Wall. I don't like rust, has bad connotations. The sculpture was blamed for the graffiti that it attracted and also for people urinating on it. I can't make this up, neither could you. We shouldn't spend money on public art, and they didn't ask us what we wanted. So how come it was removed? In a controversy, there must be someone who's determined to have a work removed. That's somebody who feels it's their personal mission. In this case, it was Bill Diamond, who was the head of the GSA Region 1, which covered New York. He had it removed at night when there was no official head of either the NEA or the GSA in DC. A couple of closing thoughts. Tilted Arc is more famous in its absence than it ever was, or most likely would have been in its presence. I began my book with a quote from Toni Morrison. Spectacle is the best means by which an official story is formed and is a superior mechanism for guaranteeing its longevity. We've got a lot of that going on today. I also would like to consider this controversy as censorship. It revealed a gap in the legal system that offers limited protection for art, especially abstract art that is perceived as having no content. This is a quote from the executive director of the Fund for Free Expression of the Human Rights Watch. If we look into the mirror one morning and see a censor staring back, there's a good chance one will soon be knocking at the door. Thank you.
We're now going to hear from Audrey Flack. Tell us about your project.
My queen, hi, I'm Audrey. And I don't have anything written down, and I tend to be a little scattered, so bear with me. I got a letter in the mail. I guess it was a request for proposal, and it was from the Friends of Queen Catherine. And I said, this looks a little hokey, what is this? And I read it, and it was a request for me to submit my work to be considered for this project. And there were some very prominent names, like Claire Shulman, the borough president of Queens, and the head director of the Queens Museum. And well, maybe it's legitimate. I read more, and it was something that, if it happened, was my dream. Because I have long, 20 years, been a little tired of generals on horses. And if there's a woman involved, she's either looking up with a breast hanging out to make it a little exciting. And so I had an idea, and I had done a couple of projects, a couple of successful projects where I have put women out there. This was going to be huge, and it was going to be in the East River. And it would be of a woman named Queen Catherine of Braganza. She was a Portuguese princess. She was married to King Charles II of England in an arranged marriage and became Queen of England. Interesting thing is that the borough of Queens was named after her, Queen Catherine. Kings County, Brooklyn, was named after her husband, King Charles. And New York City, where we are now, was named after Charles' brother, the Duke of York. Well, I got really excited, because if this could happen, I could put I really think the earth, the world, needs balance between males and females. And look what we're seeing now. It's really interesting what's happening. You know, I wanted to put the female principle out there. And the major female we have is the Statue of Liberty. And I think Bartoli really did a terrific sculpture. I think his crown with the light in it, I really want to use light in my sculpture. Anyhow, that's another story. But he lit the crown. But you know, his mother posed for this. And he had troubles with his mother. And while she's great, she's a very stern image. And more, I would not say she's very feminine. And there's female, there's feminine, but there was some balance I really wanted. So I applied, and make the story short, it was an international competition. I made a maquette. I won. It was my dream, you know? And my maquette was 27 inches, that big. Through the years, by the way, I do want you to know this. I researched her. I liked her. She lived most of her life, her young life, in a nunnery. She was a very innocent young woman. She had olive color skin, kind of a sallow Portuguese, the range of skin. When she marries Charles, she goes to England, where the ladies of the court were using white powder, and puffing up their hair, and she was wearing a high neck thing from the nunnery. Tell me if I'm going on too long. 2 minutes. And they made fun of her. She had a hard time. She never hurt anyone. I don't want to begin to tell you, she had a really rough life. She introduces tea to England. They got trade routes from, anyhow, okay. So I'm working on it. And she wore her hair in these 2 bunches on the sides with curls. And she was apparently not very attractive. Charles already had 14 illegitimate children. He was having affairs with everybody. And he said, well, she's not horrible looking. And at first, I tried to get my statue to look like her. But I wanted her to be strong, intelligent, attractive, and I wanted women to love her, I wanted men to love her. And gradually the face started to change. But then something very interesting happened. I'll take 1 minute. In the middle of all this, my mother's sister, my Aunt Gertie, who had very, very white skin and very jet black hair, and my favorite aunt married an African American. And she was banished from the family. And I was a child, and they would not let me see her. They would not give me her address. Finally, when all the patriarchs died, I said, Mom, I want to meet my cousins, and I want to see my aunt. This was in the middle of the Queen Catherine. Life happens in mysterious ways. I had a Christmas party in my house, and my aunt came with my 3 cousins. And I took a look. I don't know. Karen had a toothache. I don't know if she's here tonight. She couldn't come. And that was the face. That was the face I'd been looking for. And I knew then that I wanted to make the face of the new millennium. I wanted to make a multiracial face, not just a biracial face, but a face that could be anything. Mexican, Indian, Sephardic Jew, anything. And I worked really hard to do it. And I wanted to make a healing sculpture. The rest, is I'm going to cut it short, but it got caught in political controversy. And I have a small one. There's a plaster at the Butler Institute, but the big one got melted down for scrap after 10 years' work. So it's very sad, because I think there would have been a lot of good that could have come out. I don't think in all of history we have a female out there with a biracial face. And now look what's happened. Prince Harry.
Thank you. We can return maybe a little bit later in the discussion to what happened, but we're on a time limit, so let us turn now to Ohad.
Hi, I'm Ohad. I mean, when I went to school for art in Jerusalem, I've learned about Tilted Arc. So in a way, I'm kind of like already growing up on understanding the problematics of working in a public sphere, and in a way, my impulse was I want to be as far away from public sphere as possible, because I totally understand all sides in this debate. And for a long time, I was basically celebrating, thank God there's like the white box. You could do experimental stuff, and then it goes. Is that better? Yes. The white box is a place where you could experiment with stuff, and then, you know, it doesn't harm anybody, and it could go away. And then after a few, I mean, but still, this question of what happens in public space in the long run is actually more interesting and much harder and more interesting for me as I grow older and realize that even in the white box, there's like a whole, like the white box is like the biggest lie ever. It's not white and it's not indifferent, and there's like politics there. It's just, you don't see them right away. So in a way, getting the commission for the city to do something for the street, which is my first permanent public piece, was super, super exciting. And I think, I'm not sure if I'm right to be sitting here, because first of all, like my piece got realized. There was a little bit of a controversy through the process, which I was very intimidated from in the beginning, because it's like a big deal when you're like working on something and then, you know, you start to get from like the loneliness of the studio, like all of these energies directed at you. It's very hard to argue with that. But in the end, I've kind of understood, like, this is a public sphere, and I think I've said it before, like, there's something about public art which does something exactly in that lane. It tells people, this is yours, this is public. So people don't go on sidewalks and say, this is my bridge, this is my side, but when they say public, it's like, ooh, ugly, like, change it, which in a way is like claiming ownership of public sphere, and I'm for that. And in a way, it was almost surprising that my piece got all, because it's so relatable and it's so gender neutral, and it's even like shying away from the monumentality of like standing heroically overlooking something. It's, you know, it's leaning down, it's resting, it's stopping, it's doing, in a way, all of these things that in the back of my mind have to do with the desire to live in a society which is able to generate big symbols and monumental icons, at the same time be tolerant of like different type of stories, and not just like celebrating the victors, the people on horses, the generals. So in a way, when I'm thinking about making a monument, it's always about the position of weakness and the position of being a citizen, and being a, but nevertheless, there was a controversy, and I think it had more to do with what was happening in general in this neighborhood at that time. There were a lot of people being pushed out of their studios and houses because prices were jumping up, as happens in this city. And suddenly they see somebody coming and like pouring money on ridiculous pink sculpture, public art. And of course, there would, the minute the piece did come out, everybody stopped complaining. Like nobody, like people moved on, and I occasionally get like a, you know, like a selfie on Instagram, like saying, I know, I got it. Like it's, you know, like you climb a rock and there's like a rock in the end of a mountain, and you go and you take a picture with a rock. And I kind of like did that. I feel that I did my civic duty of like, you know, generating something in that area that differentiated from other places. Like, you know, you go and you get to the pink sculpture and you turn left, and this is a place now, and it's kind of like stops this like, you know, like bland motion of thing, and yeah. Kendal, take it.
Thank you.
I was working with Kendal on that thing, and we've been sitting and defending the project, and it happened during a reconsideration of the percent for art law, and like a reconsideration of like the role the public has in the decision making. So it was interesting, and I felt that I was going through like a really interesting thing. I mean, it was hard, but I'll do it again. Yeah, not for this city, I guess. Yeah.
Thank you. And now Kendal, Henry, thank you.
Yeah, this was a good one. There are about a little over a couple of hundred percent for art programs in the United States, and they usually come out of a city or a municipal entity. And controversy is something that they all try to avoid like the plague. Nobody wants a controversy with their project because that would mean that you could lose your program, you could lose funding, and that sort of thing. So as a result of that, we tend to be very, very careful and try to do things in a way that is very inclusive to avoid any kind of controversies. But with a piece like Ohad piece and this piece I'm going to talk about in a minute, it's hard to determine where this controversy is going to come from or what's going to cause it. And so I wanted to talk about this piece by Ellen Harvey in a plaza in Bed-Stuy. And what you're seeing here is not the controversial piece. It's the piece that resulted out of what was a controversy in the first place. And this is more of a local controversy. And I take you to our process a little bit. We have a series of panels by which we select the artists. And as part of that, we tap into the community what the artwork is going to go into and have artists from that community participate in our process and whatnot. But it's never guaranteed that an artist from that community is going to get the project because we're looking for the best art, whatever that means. So when this project was being commissioned and we selected 4 finalists, 3 were from the community and Ellen was not. And she ended up being selected, and the community felt, why is this artist doing a work in our community? She doesn't represent us. And that's a really harsh thing for an artist to hear. And that's a really harsh thing for a program person to know, to sort of, with our goal is not to pick a person from the community. Our goal is to pick the best art and hopefully, that responds to the community. So after going back and forth and she's like, I think I want to stop this project. I don't want to do it anymore. And she sort of set a goal of if someone from the community board is willing to collaborate with me, I'll continue. If not, I will stop. And her initial proposal was exactly what you see here, but it was just a quilting pattern that had no real reference to the community, which is understandable. And in her collaboration with this particular Bed-Stuy community, they had selected each diamond in this quilt represents something very specific to that community, a location, whether it be a detail of a building or a snippet of a tree that's very special to the community. And each of these locations have a very rich history that's very specific to this Bed-Stuy community. So the result of that collaboration created this project that they absolutely love and cherish, and it's sort of like a secret project for them, because if you don't live there, you walk by, you see a beautiful mosaic piece on the ground. If you live there, you now see the connection between your history, your community, and you feel like you're part of it. So what causes a controversy is really hard to determine, but using that as a means of moving forward in a learning experience and moving forward is sort of what we aspire to at Percent for Art. I've counted about 5 controversies that the program has had, and some books have been written about, and we've learned something from each of them. And what Ohad was referring to with the sunbather, that introduced new legislation in terms of how we interact with the public, and to opening our process even more than it already is. So which is always good.
Thank you. So I want to just quickly follow up on for the 2 artists because I don't think you had enough time to actually tell people what the controversies were. In other words, what was the problem? So maybe just in a couple of words, and I know it's difficult, but could each of you just say what what people were complaining about, so people know in case they're not familiar with the history of the project. Just a little.
Yeah. Well, the complaints were a range of points which had to do with, like taste. The question was like, why is it pink? People hate pink, apparently. It was why is it there or not somewhere else, which is a legitimate question. And there was a question of why is it so expensive, which is a legitimate question. Though, again, this is it's this kind of question is like, it should be free, and I don't think it should be free, and we do not want to, get free art to decorate our public space. But I understand that this is public money. Like this should be a question. What else? Like why do just one thing and not do 15 little ones? So all of these questions came, and there were a few more. And again, something like Kendal was mentioning, why somebody that lives in Brooklyn does a project for Long Island City. And each one of these questions have answers, and after a while I realized that I showed up to the public there were two main public, forums where there was like a discussion and people made their opinions, and I've answered my thing. And,
so the fora were held by the percent program or council?
Yes, we put together with Councilmember Van Bramer a meeting at PS1 to talk about this project and hear from the people there who were complaining. But it turns out that not many people had any issue with the artwork. It was just more of an online sort of banter.
And that having a public forum like that, was that something that your program had done before, or was that something new that you developed to try to kind of control the situation?
Yeah, we felt that we needed to have this type of forum to sort of address the issue because it was, a hot button topic at the moment. But in our general process of commissioning an artwork, we do a lot of public engagement way before we even start a process of selecting an artist and throughout the entire process as well. So, things happened where, the reality of the situation is we invite you to a public forum. You have other things going on. You're not going to come to see some art project or, it may not be important at the time. So that happens. But yeah, so we felt that we needed to have a specific one for this project because the conversations was getting heated.
Great. Okay.
And there was something very different between our situations, because the way Percent for Art works, they pick an artist, not an artwork. So I came up with the idea. I came up with a topic, and you're commissioned with this is who you're going to make a sculpture of, which is a very different situation.
Right. So perhaps you could just say a word about what
That
happened.
was all good, and I really enjoyed hearing what everybody said. And I think the idea of including the public is important. Really, I did a Percent for Artwork, and also I did one that wasn't, where the public was asked, the mayor had groups. I think that's really important because public art is for the public. It's for people. This happened differently. This was the Portuguese government, and they knew about Queens being named after a Portuguese woman, a princess, and they remembered that France gave the Statue of Liberty to the United States, so they wanted to do this, and they thought this was wonderful. So I did win, the work. They loved the work. What was interesting about it's the whole thing. I mean, a lot could be written about it. The people liked the work. It wasn't coming from the people. There was a reporter from Newsday who broke the story. Very bright, really, and I liked her, and we got along, and she liked the statue. She was African American, And she took pictures of the statue and brought it to some schools in Queens. And the kids loved it. It came from somewhere else. It was very political, and I don't know the whole story, but I do know a lot, and there's a lot that is too much to go into now. But the basic thing that happened is there was a group that said Portugal had slaves in the 17th century. She was Portuguese. They didn't want it. And there was a meeting that Claire Shulman called. And the head of the project, a Portuguese man, got a hold of a historian of that period. He came with a replica of Queen Catherine's will. She never had a slave, and left money. She was actually probably an early feminist. She left money to free slaves and women and children first. So it got embroiled, it got crazy. It was a time, it might have been the first time that this would have happened. So they were not interested in looking at the work. And I remember saying, come up to the foundry, look at it. And somebody from NBC or somewhere did come and liked it. So it was more than, several books could be written about what happened to poor Queen Catherine.
It got caught up in racial politics as...
But there was a lot of politics also, political.
Yes,
Claire
yes,
Shulman
but-
was running for re-election.
No, I
there were factions.
Yeah. So it was complicated. But there's certain connections, I think, in both of your cases. But you mentioned Newsday, and I was going to ask Professor Senie, but actually all of you, whether you wanted to comment about the role of the press in shaping controversies and their outcome with Tilted Arc, and perhaps how it compares, how the situation then compares with the situation today, is the role that the press plays now. And the press could include Twitter.
Well, when the Tilted Arc controversy erupted, we didn't have Twitter. However, we had newspapers, all of whom framed the controversy in terms of should it stay or should it go, in totally oppositional ways, populism versus elitism, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that by framing and reframing the controversy in that way, they had a lot to answer for. We see the same thing now in terms of how the public hearings for the current controversies are playing out. I attended 3 of them, and I've seen them reported on television, and they usually report the most inflammatory oppositional comments. You don't get an accurate picture of what went on. You never got an accurate picture of what went on at the Tilted Arc hearings. So I think the press is highly culpable in terms of ultimate results because politicians pay a lot of attention to the press.
And I'm wondering what your experience on this has been as an administrator.
Mm-hmm.
Do you feel that the program gets not proper coverage, but that it's a balanced perspective?
So what we try to do to avoid any of the, imbalance or perspective or whatever, is to control the narrative as much as we can, to sort of put what the meaning of the artwork is, and sort of to put a lot of information out there ahead of time, so you don't get somebody else's interpretation sort of drives how people see the piece, and so that's very important to how we address sort of these issues.
How do you deal with a situation like social media, Twitter in particular, where people get very snarky and there's a certain pressure as city officials to, you want to be able to respond, but you can't necessarily respond. I mean, is there any way of trying to deal with that?
Not really, but you just got a deal. But the good thing about our program is by the time when the piece is out there, it has been vetted, it has gone through a lot of, the rigmarole as it is, so it's done that. So by the time it appears on Twitter as a finished product or any social media, then, it's less likely to be in sort of the controversial arena. With Ohad's piece, the controversy started when it was a proposal and a sort of a misunderstanding as to, again, somebody else created that narrative as to what the piece was. And this image right here is the proposal, and it got tweaked a little bit to be the real thing, but we didn't control that story. Somebody else came out with it, and it beforehand, and it blew up. So we try to avoid that as much as possible, or be forward-facing and saying this is what it is, and give as much information.
I just, as a point of sort of historical point, it seems like oftentimes these, maybe not so much with Tilted Arc, but certainly with Civic Virtue and in the cases you're describing, and yours as well, that people form the judgments before they've actually seen the work or really know anything about it, and that sort of feeds on itself through the press and creates a lot of problems, or can. Mm-hmm. So it is a challenge, and now especially with social media. And you were
Claire Shulman, by the way, the borough president of Queens, is the one that hated that statue of the man stomping on a woman, and she finally
He's not stomping on her.
What's he doing?
He's standing astride, but we won't go there. Can't be started.
I think had Queen Catherine been vetted the way you do things, I think had it been presented to the people in the area, things might have been better. But these days, also I didn't tell you that the Newsday reporter, Merle English, who she did try to be fair. She really did. But this got so personal at that time. She went to Portugal, and she came back and she said, Audrey, you don't know. I climbed into these places where the slaves were held. It was horrible. So the whole thing got out of hand that way.
Because she was also then invested in
She
the
was
narrative.
personally invested as an African-American woman. And, I think she liked the sculpture, and she really did try to do. I just have to say, I know I hate the voices, when you hear a reporter say this, and now, there's going to be a storm, and there's going to be a World War III, but I think some of these journalists are our new heroes. I think they're uncovering things and taking chances. So there are several sides to everything. And also these days, anybody can attack anything.
Well,
You can
and
find,
they do.
and so you're going to find something about anything.
Well, we have some time that I would love to get your questions if you have any. And I don't know if there's a microphone or how. Oh, you have a microphone. So if anyone has questions, we have, yes.
I want to give you an opportunity on Tilted Art. You said when there was a hearing, there were like 160 speakers in favor, and there were 22 against. But a substantially larger number in favor than against. But then you quoted the against. So I'd like to hear a little bit more about the pro side, because we're all out there trying to defend these things, and I'd love a vocabulary. Well, I'd love to know, what the argument was for keeping Tilted Art so that having it disappear is even more unconscionable. And And then have a little bit of vocabulary from all of you for those of us who are out in the public and some stranger walks by and says, what is that? We can address it for them in a positive way instead of, you don't like pink. So what is art?
Thank you for that.
Yeah. Well, thank you for your pro-art stance. People argue that it was a really important work of art and Sarah was an important sculptor. Now, that may not carry a lot of weight with people who don't see that. But I think the issue that you're raising is really important, which is how do we get information about art to people who do not have an art background? It's not that they're not intelligent, they're just uninformed, in the same way that I'm uninformed about physics, say. What is the best way of doing that? QR codes are a little tired now, and they weren't in existence then. Can we have some online database, but who's going to take the time to really look that up? There were other arguments that had to do with it hasn't been up a long enough time in order to judge. So 81 to 89, but what is a long enough time? There had been no program to explain this art to the people. So in other words, that building and that plaza were in existence for a long time, and suddenly this thing appeared. So people said, well, maybe other things could be done to make the plaza more attractive. And Sarah, in fact, did offer to work with whoever might want to do that, maybe provide some benches or some amenity, but that didn't happen. So, and there were things in the art world that really challenged its status. Art and Architecture did an exhibition, said, what would you do to make tilted arc palatable, in effect, giving people the opportunity to graffiti or urinate, no, make holes in it so you could see through it, put little flowers on the top. So there were even people in the art world who didn't take it seriously, but for those of you who are advocates, and I'm imagining most of you out there are, it's a tough sell. But I would be really happy for some suggestions on how do we explain, or how do we give people an entry point, I think is a better way of saying it. What is the entry point that will make this art meaningful to you so that we can maybe then go on and have a more complicated conversation? But thank you for that question.
Yeah, and so that question is something that we try to come up with some ideas to deal with as well. And so what we've been trying to do is before we start a process of selecting a commission, we create this environment where, as either through a community board meeting or a meeting of our own creation, where we invite the community to talk about art in general and talk about what public art is, the forms that it can take, and have, so just so that we all are on the same page, because a lot of times we hear public art and people think some sort of sculpture or mural. That's great, but there are other things that could be as well. And engage them in the entire process, and so by the time the piece is up, the piece is out in the public, because most of our pieces have very specific communities around them. They are the ones that are able to be, help tell the story of the piece itself and what it means, whereas a plaque may not be enough. So we try to garner ownership of the piece of the artwork from the community, so they become the ones that share those stories.
Wait for the mic, please.
I'm sorry if this is a little bit of a naive question, but when you say invite the community, who do you mean? Does it depend?
Yeah, it depends on where it is.
Right.
In a place like Midtown Manhattan, who is a community there, so it's kind of weird. But in a bedside community, let's say, we work with with our programs group at Cultural Affairs that tap into a lot of these community cultural groups. We tap into those folks to be the ones to target who the audience are and do the invitations. We do stuff like go through open studio groups, and so it's a lot of different is case by case, and like again, certain communities are more involved than others, or more definable than others, and so that's where we start.
I was just going to say, just another way of putting that issue is, who are the stakeholders, and how do we identify them, and then how do we make contacts?
Hi. I just wanted to bring up an interesting point especially about female sculptures in New York City. I actually just read that these artists, Gilly and Mark, were creating different bronze sculptures of powerful women to be put around New York City in 2018, and they were going to have the public vote on which women should be represented. So I think it's kind of like that nice balance that we were speaking about before. It's more just a comment, yeah.
I haven't heard about that. Is anyone?
It was on this website called Untapped Cities.
Okay. I don't know who's actually, Untapped Cities is the site, so we'd have to check to see who's sponsoring it. I mean, that's an interesting question, who's sponsoring it, because that will determine where the works actually can go. I mean, if it's going in on the city property, then it would be connected with the Department of Transportation Urban Art Program, probably.
Or the Parks Department. Yeah.
Right, or Parks Department.
Would it be temporary, or?
Yes.
This would be
It would have to be, yes.
She had her question up front, but we need the mic first, and then.
In all of this, and in the current discussion about what monuments will stay or what monuments need greater explication, and in my memory of the conversation about the Sarah piece about Tilted Arc, it seems a lot of it has to do with the legibility of the art and how those who interact with it understand it or are put off by it. And my memory of of that conversation was that a lot of people found it alienating, and that the space around it was alienating. And possibly this is for you, for Percent for Art, or for others involved in placing art. What can bring people closer to public art, and what pushes people away? And what makes, if you're going to put art in public, it's because evidently that we want people to not have to go into buildings that might be foreboding, but what can bring people in and what can push them away?
Let me just say one thing about that, which is certainly, it's sort of a continuation of this other conversation. People go to museums by choice, and presumably they have an interest in art of some sort, or they're going to the gift shop, whatever. But we regularly provide more information for people in museums who already presumably know something than we do for public art, where you have a general audience where we can, I think, safely assume that many have no art background. So how do we change that?
I have something to say in general about like this idea that it's public's art problem. Like, when you look about, when you think about Tilted Arc, which is like this inaccessible abstract thing, in a way it's a reaction to a previous generation that understands public art as a figure that tells a story about the history of the place. The problem we have is the problem of representation. How can we come up with a society with images that we can all stand behind and feel, and not just like avoid any kind of image and just put abstract geometric shapes it's there. So art, I mean, I'm not pushing away the thing, but we have a general problem in generating images that reflects us, and we could stand behind them.
Well,
There's like a big nod there.
yeah, I think what's important is the intent of the artist. And I think Richard Serra tends to be a very thought-provoking artist. And he wants his work to bring out certain things in people, and it did. And I think there's a respect you have to have for the public too. I don't know if I worked in one of those buildings, and this is not saying anything about his work as art, but if I worked in one of those buildings and I wandered across the street and I'm hit with this huge steel thing, I might want to kick it. You have to understand that. What is the intent? Is he trying to bring people together? Is he trying to make a pleasant place? Or is he making a statement? And what statement is he making? And so you've got to respect that aspect of it, as you have to respect the concept of art. And then you get, in terms of abstract art, you get this kind of mall art, safe, some decorative thing that nobody's going to complain about because it's cute or it's nice. So it's got a lot of aspects to public art.
We have time for one more question, and I see a tall hand up, so let's go with that.
Well, this is going to go back in time to show that public art was always a problem, and also it depended on politics a lot. And I'll give you a simple example. Does everybody know the famous sculpture in Central Park, Angel of the Waters, at Bethesda Terrace? Okay, it's a sculpture of a female angel with wings, and the reason it's there is because it dedicates the turning on of the Croton Waterworks to New York City. And so the first place for the water to flow was where that statue is. But the point I'm making is this. There was a commission appointed to design that sculpture or design the statue, and it was a competition. Now, who won the competition? It was a woman sculptor, which was very unusual for those days, but she won the competition because her uncle was on the commission. Okay? So, the design of Central Park, that was supposed to be the only sculpture in the whole park, was Angel of the Waters. It was a focal point of the park, and there was not supposed to be any other sculptures in the park. That was Olmsted and Vox's plan. You've been to Central Park? You've probably seen 100 statues in the park. Now, why are they there? Because of political influence. Why is the king of Lithuania there on a horse? Okay? And why is Andrew Green there? Okay? That's just two examples. And why is Shakespeare in the park? And why is Columbus in the park?
Would you be able to tell us your question? So,
I'm making a statement that it's a lot of politics have to do with the sculptures that we have in the city, and you have to contend with the local community, but you also have to contend with the local political organization.
exactly. Thank you. Thank you very much. I think we are out of time now, but we have a lovely reception, and the exhibition is open for you to go see. So we'd like to thank you so much, and I thank the speakers for your time.